everyone, and welcome back to the Beadaholique video studio. I'm Kat Sylvia, and today I'm joined by Alexandra Smith, and today we are giving you guys a beautiful class all about resin. So we've had a lot of questions over the years about making resin jewelry, and we're going to be doing a lot of troubleshooting today because resin can kind of appear a little intimidating, but we're going to break it down for you. So this is Resin 101. So if you've never done resin before, this class is for you, and if you're interested in kind of up-leveling that and taking that to the next level, we're going to definitely talk about that as well. All right, so why don't you come on in here and just kind of take a look at everything that we've got going on here. We're actually going to be doing a resin pour here today. So I'm going to walk you through exactly how to do everything. We're going to do some coloring. We're going to add some glitter. We're going to add some mica powder. We're going to kind of talk about all the different types of bezels and types of projects that you might be interested in starting with. We have lots to talk about. We're going to talk about how to embed organic materials, flowers. We actually have a butterfly wing to show you, which is very kind of cool, so stick around for that. So if you've joined us here on our live class before, you know that we do a giveaway. So we're going to kick off our live here with a beautiful giveaway. So if you are, of course, I assume you're interested in resin. So what we're going to do is we are going to give you a pack of the ice resin, and this is going to come with those cups and those stir sticks in it. So you're going to get this pack of resin to really get you started there. We're also going to be giving you the Cast & Craft mold, and this has lots of different little shapes that you can play around with, and we're going to talk a little bit about molds in a little bit here. And then we're going to give you several little bezels here just to get you started. And I have some beautiful Nunn design bezels, and this is from the latest collection, and all these bezels are available at beadaholique.com. And of course, I'm going to give you some Cast & Craft opaque pigment, and I'm going to give you the white because that's a good staple to have. It can lighten your projects. You can do a kind of cool French enamel look, which I'm going to show you a little bit later. But white is always good to have on hand to lighten up those beautiful colors that you can get over at Beadaholique. So all you need to do to win this giveaway is just leave a comment, ask a question, let us know where you're tuning in from, or if you are liking a project we're showing, you can shout that out too. Any comment below enters you to win the giveaway, and we will announce the winner live here. And our class is going to go about 45 minutes to an hour, so be sure to stick around for that.
Be sure to ask any questions that you have, although we'll be portioning our instruction out in ways that we may need to field questions to different times of the video.
Yes, we're gonna get to a lot of your questions probably in the course of the video, but still keep asking because we'll be attending to the comments, of course, after the live as well. Yeah. But just so you guys have a little bit of overview, I said it just a moment ago, but we're going to actually do a resin pour. We're going to talk about what you can use to color your resin. We're going to talk about organic materials, and then we're going to talk about some different types of bezels and some tips and tricks to help keep your resin level and to dome it. So there's a lot to really discuss in there. But because resin is an extensive process, we are going to actually start right away by pouring some resin and mixing it. All right, so let me clear my space just a little bit here because I want you guys to come in and be level with us. All right.
Let me level with you.
Let me level with you. So the first thing that I want to talk about is safety. So obviously we are actually wearing our aprons, we are wearing our gloves, and we do have these little masks here as well. If you are working with a lot of resin, you're going to want some sort of a respirator or a mask because it is toxic, you know. It does have a little bit of a scent to it, I'll say.
Did you also make mention that our door is open today, which we keep for
yes.
air, and that's unusual for us. So
yeah, so we've kept the door open. You're going to want to work in a nice ventilated area. Anytime you're working with resin, you want to work in a dust-free environment as much as possible, but also as your resin dries and cures, it's going to take 24 to 72 hours. So you're going to want to leave it in a nice, cool space, nothing too hot, nothing too cold. I know resin is very temperamental. But we are going to be working with, we're going to do 2 tablespoons here of our resin. So I have my little measuring cup here. And today I'm going to be using the Cast & Craft Easy Cast. And I'm going to go ahead and start with my pour here. And I'm going to get right down to my level. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to have to turn this around so that I can see it. But what's going to happen is I'm going to pour my resin and my hardener. And I'm going to go ahead and pour that resin because you always want to work in a 1-to-1 ratio. So I'm going to pour 1 tablespoon into my little measuring cup here. And you can go fast at first, but then kind of slow it down because you really want to focus on, and this is getting a little science classy on you, there is always going to be that little meniscus there that is going to, it's that little curvature that's going to come up the edge of that cup. So you want to just be really careful and go nice and slow towards the end.
Did you just say meniscus?
Yes, I did.
I just learned a word.
Science.
Now, having wet wipes on hand is great too. In case you have a little drip, that can help.
All right, and here is the second part. So this is the hardener. So you're going to do, like I said, exactly a 1-to-1 ratio. And I'm just going to pour that in there. And you see that I'm pouring quickly, but not too fast, because we're going to end up with some bubbles when we stir it, but let's not add more than what we have to. All right. So I don't know if the camera can come down fairly level with this, but I want you to sort of see that it's separated there. All right, I'm getting just to the top there.
Kind of like honey.
It is. So, and there we go. Perfect. All right. So I have my exact 1-to-1 ratio. You can see that there's a little bit of a different coloring there. So we have 2, and let me maybe put my glove behind it there so you can see that there's a little bit of separation. All right. So now we recommend using like a slim popsicle stick, and you're just going to come in and you're just going to start to stir it. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to start to see that there's a lot of little marbling and striations there. The idea with mixing is that we want to get it so that it is completely mixed, so you're not seeing any of that. So I don't know if I can kind of move it forward there for you. There we go.
It's actually really relaxing to watch someone work with resin when it's not you. When it's
not you. Sure.
The pressure's a little more on, though we'll talk about that too, because in troubleshooting, I've discovered it's more forgiving than you would realize. There are ways of fixing problems and avoiding disaster that we can talk about.
And one thing too is it's good to like just kind of scrape the sides as you sort of go around, just making sure all that resin is getting nice and mixed in there. All right. So I want to address a couple things while I'm mixing, because usually you're going to mix for a couple of minutes. So I'm actually going to pass this off to Alexandra, who's going to help me with the mixing. She's not going to do anything different than what I've been doing so far. Just going to continue to mix that there, so I'll let you kind of, perfect. All right. So while she's mixing, I'll stay kind of on my knees over here. So one of the things I want to talk about is how different is some of the different types of resin. So we today are going to be using the Easy Cast, but you can also see over here on the side of the table, I have the ice resin, and then I also have the Nunn design resin. So what we're working with today is we're working with a 2-part epoxy resin. It's also sometimes considered casting resin. What you don't want to use for jewelry is you don't want to use a polyester resin. That's something you're probably going to get at a hardware store, and it's going to be something that you're going to want to use on boating or hardware material. So you want to get a jeweler's grade resin, and you're going to want to get something that is an ice resin. I didn't bring out because we've had let me start over. We've had resin that we've had here that has gone bad because it's been in our design space. We've used it. It takes a long time to use a good amount of the resin. So you can see here that I have one that looks a little bit more yellow. This is the hardener. And it's not actually yellow. You can see as she's mixing it, it's very clear. But what can happen is your hardener can actually turn more of like an amber color. Once it gets to that point, your resin might not be good anymore. It does have a shelf life, especially once you've opened it, it will start to oxidize. But also resin can just sort of age naturally. So it won't necessarily age once you've put it on a piece unless you put it under like a UV light. Speaking of UV light, there is UV resin, and that's something different. That's where you'll need that UV light to actually cure the resin. So that reacts a little bit differently to that UV light. But what we're working with here today does not need that. This will just cure in, like I said, 24 to 72 hours. 24 to be dry to the touch, but 72 to be fully cured and nice and hard for you. So that is what we are working with today. So don't try to go to the hardware store and get the polyester resin. It won't really set up the same way. And also the ratios can be very different. You can do like a 2-to-1 depending on what you're doing for your boat. So yeah, don't do that. We sell lots of the jeweler's grade resin here. We have various different brands, and the only difference between them is just the brands. We just offer several brands here at Beadaholique.com. All right.
So we've been stirring for at least a couple of minutes. There are still a few striations, which I was noticing it was taking a little longer in our workspace when we were practicing. It may have to do with the cooler weather lately.
Yes.
But also I'm going to ask you if the 10 minutes that we let this set, will it clarify during that time?
A little bit, but you'll also notice once we start to pour it into different cups, it will really truly become clear.
Okay, is there such a thing as stirring too much?
You can over stir. Once you start to, you can actually feel the cup get warm. So
That's not happening. It's nice and chilly.
It is chilly. But you can actually, I mean, there's not really a way to necessarily over mix it. I think you just get to a point where you're mixing it for no reason and you're just introducing bubbles.
Yeah, I think it is getting clearer, definitely.
Good.
So shall I pass that to you to have it sit?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're looking pretty good there. Let me give a look there. Yeah, it's actually looking pretty good. So I'm going to kind of let this sit and chill here. So a couple of the other things that we have on our table here is we have mold release. Now this is just a little spray, and it's a mold release that you're going to use. This is by Casting Craft, and you can spray this onto a mold just like this. And what's going to happen is it's going to create a nice little clear sheen on it. And once you pour your resin into here to make various cabochons, you can go ahead and pop those out and it's going to release from the mold. So this is a good little thing to have on hand. And we also recommend having molds on hand to see, you're going to have extra resin. So you can always just make some extra cabochons, or this one's actually really cool. You can make some little hoop earrings. We have some examples of that to show you in a little bit. We do have a question that I want to address right away.
Yeah, a question about molds.
Sure.
Can other materials besides epoxy resin be used in molds?
Yes, we've actually used it with our artist concrete, so that's another material that you can use in it. We also do have the putty molds, and these are actually really kind of cool. You can make a mold in a mold if you wanted to do something like that, if you wanted to create a dome effect, which is actually very fun, and we're going to talk about this as well in just a second. But yes, you can use the molds for other materials. You just want to make sure that it is going to release. Now, if you use the mold release with some other materials, it may color it a little bit because it is a little bit wet. You want to let it dry, of course, but it is still like a film, like a liquid. Now, on resin, you can just polish that off. If you've put too much in your mold, you can polish off the mold release.
And what about the resin spray? That would go over the top as well.
Yes, and you can also use resin spray to fix that as well. And speaking of concrete, though, concrete is going to be a little bit more porous, so it might soak up some of that mold release, so it actually might colorize it a little bit. But you can use the resin spray to sort of seal it and, again, give it that shine. So I'm going to talk, after we do our little pour here, I'm going to talk a little bit about using the resin spray, and then what you can do to polish and sand, and sort of if your resin does become dull, there's a way to get it back to a nice little shine. So we're going to talk about that as well. I know there's so much to discuss with resin, so thank you for kind of sticking with us here. All right, so my resin is getting a little thicker here. I'm going to give it another little stir. There we go. It's actually looking pretty good. So it is looking a little bit clearer. I know it's so hard to tell. We have so many colors kind of going on here, and I'm sure you're looking at it against my blue gloves, and it looks blue. All right, there we go. But you can see that a lot of those little striations that were once there are gone. I'm just kind of checking and seeing, but yeah, it actually looks like it's mixed very well. So just take a look at how sort of, let me move this out of the way, how liquid this is. So when I kind of drip it back in there, it disappears right away on the surface of that resin. So you can kind of see that right there. So this is good. This is like, what are we at? Maybe 5 minutes in, 5 to 10 minutes in. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, and we're gonna continue to kind of let that sit. Let me draw your attention over here. So I did a video of how to actually achieve a marbled look in resin. I'm gonna stand up here for just a moment. There we go. So what happens here, and you can see that I also have an example here on an open back bezel, is the color underneath. So in this example, the black resin, I let sit for about an hour or two, and then I came back in with the white, and I let the white sit for that amount of time as well. And you just kind of drip it in, and then take a little toothpick and draw it around wherever you want it to go. You can see it a little bit more clear in this example because that green is a little darker. But you can actually do a marbled resin look, but it just depends on the time that you have, because you have to let your resin kind of sit and sort of pre-cure a little bit because you want it to kind of firm up. And that's the same that I would say if you're going to try to do resin on like a flat tag type of a situation. You're going to want to have it not as
runny.
As runny. I was like, it just makes me think of a nose, but yeah, not as runny is kind of what we're getting at. All right, so let's see. Are you guys ready to do some actual resin?
I think so.
All right, so let's start and let's do just a very traditional bezel resin piece here. So I have a Nunn design bezel. Now you can clean these out with alcohol if you want. You don't have to. But this is just going to be a really nice, easy piece to show you how to pour resin into a bezel. All right, and I want to bring another example here. So this guy down here, this is a little piece here, and inside there is a collage sheet. Now you can use collage sheets, which is this example here, and then we also have transfer sheets. Now the transfer sheets on the back of this, these are going to actually become clear, which is really kind of a different technique, and we're going to talk about that too. But for here, I used the Swelligant sealant, so that's this guy here. So I just did this in a video for you, so I'm going to finish it off here. But what happens is you can take that piece, use the Nunn Design glue, and glue your paper or your photograph. So this is if you are curious about putting a photograph into a bezel and sealing it. You can use the Nunn Design glue to place it down there and make sure it's on all little corners, and you just use a little paintbrush.
Is that like a white craft glue?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
We recommend the Nunn Design glue because it is photo safe. So you want to use a photo safe glue. So you wouldn't want to use necessarily like any kind of what am I trying to say? You'd want to use more of like a scrapbook type of a glue.
Oh, okay, as
if you have that,
to just school glue or tacky
right,
glue.
because you want to use something that's a little non-toxic. But then you're going to add several coats of the clear sealant, and this is in the matte finish. And the reason I like the matte finish, and that's why we have it here at Beadaholique, is it's going to allow you to see that it's nice and sealed. And it's that matte finish there. You can see that it's a little bit shiny, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour resin on top of that. Okay. So let me bring this guy over here, and can I get that out of the way? Okay, so coming back down here with me, what I want to show you is that for this particular bezel, and I know it might be hard to see from the camera angle here, but the loop on this bezel actually goes beneath the bezel itself, so it doesn't sit level. So if you wanted to pour resin in there, it's going to drip towards one side. So here's my first little tip. I'm going to take a couple of quarters here, and I'm going to set my little bezel on top of it with that ring kind of hanging off the side, and that makes my bezel nice and level.
Now you're on butcher paper. We did cover the table.
Yes, we did cover our table. Make sure that you definitely cover your workspace. Wax paper works great for that as well.
I was just going to ask if you wanted to pull some in so that this could be mobile. Sometimes it's nice to be able to shift your pieces around on a level surface.
Yeah, so then you can kind of move it around on here. All right, so let me put this onto my wax paper. Go. And I have my other bezel right here. Now, if you want to do resin that you're going to color, which is what I'm going to do here, you just need to separate out your resin. But because the first thing I'm going to do in the class here is just pour that clear resin so you can see what happens, I'm going to bring this in here. Make sure we are nice and level. I know it seems like a tedious process, but the result is very cool. All right, so now I have my resin. So you can use your popsicle stick, or you can use a different, like a toothpick if it's a finer piece. But basically, you're just gonna come over here, and you're just gonna drip it. And I like to drip mine right in the center. And just make sure it's nice and slow. Now I'm gonna fill up my bezel so I can do a little bit more.
I'm noticing there's a bit of a dimensional edge and lip to that bezel. Do you want to talk about that part of it?
Yeah, so this is a Nunn Design bezel, so it's a little bit of a thicker bezel. And what you can actually achieve with that is you can create a little domed effect, which I'm going to try to attempt here. Now I'm kind of coming down to be level with it. Now drip slowly, because as you can see, the resin is sort of finding its way around that edge. It wants to go, and it wants to fill the volume and fill the space. So be careful with dripping too much too fast. Okay, I'm just kind of coming down there. But yeah, this has a nice thick lip of the bezel for you to kind of just see. Okay, one more big one. Okay, so that looks like my resin is just about level. Looking good, okay. And what's cool is the resin actually creates a little magnified effect.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now I'm gonna try to drip a little bit slower.
This is where I sometimes like to use a toothpick as opposed to the craft stick.
Mm-hmm. That's not a bad idea. One more, okay. I know, everybody hold your breath.
And here's where I'll say that and you'll notice this in a video I recently did. If you watched it on the marguerite earrings, I had a little bit of a spill over the side. And what I've discovered is after about a day's worth of curing, the piece is safe to pick up at that point, but the resin is still able to be peeled off. And so I've had good luck with saving pieces that have had that dome collapse a little bit or some spillage. So there are troubleshooting techniques that you can adopt.
Yeah. All right.
That looks pretty perfect.
So I know. So the other thing with resin is once you've poured it, it's really difficult to move it. So make sure it's right where you want it to be. I know we said that you can kind of move it a little bit on your wax paper, but I'm going to go ahead and leave mine just right there, just as it is. And I know we have probably a couple of questions. I know they're coming in. So give me just a second before I get to that, because what I'm going to start to do is I'm going to take some of this clear resin and I'm going to pour it into a couple of different cups here. Alexandra, can you get me one more cup, please? Thank you. Perfect. All right. So I'm going to pour a little bit into each cup here.
Looks like a magic trick.
Follow the resin.
Yeah.
All right. And a little bit more.
And you're doing about a tablespoon?
Just about
a teaspoon.
It's a teaspoon, yes. Just about. This part doesn't have to be as exact. Let me just get this over here. Okay.
And here's where it's good to have wax paper also, so that you can set that cup down and it won't get...
Do you want me to put it on your...
Sure, I'll take it.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to just leave that.
Felt like you were handing me a baby.
I know.
I'm a mother of 3.
All right. We have a couple of questions. Yes, Brian.
So we actually have quite a few questions about using organic materials.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, like flowers, bezels.
Yes.
Yes, we are gonna actually talk about that here in just a minute.
Yeah.
Let me show you what to do if you want to color your resin so that we can pour it into this bezel. Would you hand me the white Castin Craft? All right, so for Castin Craft, there are 2 different types. We have the opaque pigment, and why don't you hand me the green transparent there? That one. Yep.
Closest? Okay.
Closest, yep. So you can see that this one is much thicker, and this one it's a little bit more of that transparent dye. Now you can use both together. You can use one or the other. There's really no wrong way to sort of add color. The only wrong way, I'll say, is to add too much. So if we're working, and let me go ahead and set a couple of these aside. So I'm going to start working with this amount here. This is, like we said, about a teaspoon. Now, this is where the toothpicks are really going to come in handy. And here's another little tip I have. If you're going to color resin and you want to mix it, pour your color into a different cup, or at least over a different cup. Because once you pour it in there, it's in your resin. So you just want to be really careful. So what you're going to do is you're just going to get a little bit on the tip of a toothpick there. Just like so. And see how it's easy to kind of overdo it? You just want to get a little, just like so. And then I'm going to drop 1 drop into my resin. There we go, and let it drop. Okay, set that down. And now I have 1 tiny little drop of white. So let's see what it does to my resin. And it starts to mix in there. So that 1 little tiny drop really makes it nice and rich there. So it kind of starts to make it a little bit milky. So you can just see that it's got a little bit of that clear to it. And I'm actually going to do a little bit more, but I'm going to go ahead and take my toothpick there and just kind of wipe it off onto my resin because I think that might be enough. All right. So and again, just kind of mixing it.
So these bottles are really more than a lifetime supply.
Yeah.
Is there a shelf life to this?
Not that I've seen. I've had a lot of mine for a long time, and I'm gonna do it just a little bit more, actually. There we go. Okay.
Now these coloring techniques she's going to show you are usable with the organics, as you'll see also.
Yes. Yes, you can add color to like the backing of an organic if you want it to really kind of stand out. What I'm trying to achieve here, and so far I've gotten about 3 drops of that white into a teaspoon. And I'm trying to achieve that sort of French enamel look. So it's still looking a little bit clear to me. So we have another question. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, yeah, it's actually about coloring resin.
Sure.
Yeah, what kind of other things do you use to color resin? Like maybe a red paint or...
Yes, okay. So let's talk about what you can use to actually color resin.
So Kat, while you're doing that, do you want me to talk a little bit about what's over here, or did you have something in mind?
Well, I just want to kind of, I know, a little bit more. Okay. Now I'm getting into the territory of, and this is why I want people to see this, I'm getting into the territory of adding too much color. So you want to be really careful, and that's why I keep kind of picking it up and just checking that my resin is still fully mixed and is looking okay. All right. There we go. Okay. So let me set that down and I can address this. So you can use acrylic paints. You can use, I've seen people use nail polish before. You can use an alcohol ink, which is what we have. This is what the ice resin, sort of the dye is. It's a little bit closer to like an alcohol ink. You can see, hopefully again, that it's got a little bit of, it looks more like the transparent dye. So you can use that. You can also use the patinas, and Alexandra's going to do an example with the vintage patinas. So that is an ink. You can also use food coloring. However, food coloring tends to change color. So it's not the best thing to use. I have seen it done, but be careful because your green might turn yellow, like, because it'll just oxidize. So that's one thing I can't recommend. But from what I've really seen, there's not anything that you can't use. It just might yield a slightly different result than what you want because the color might change over time, like that food coloring example. But acrylic paints you can absolutely use. Those are really fun. Like I said, nail polish is great. But again, nail polish, you're going to want to be careful with how much you use because it's not as concentrated of a pigment as an actual resin pigment. So you can throw off your ratio. And if you add too much, your resin won't cure because you've thrown off the chemical reaction that's actually happening in your resin. So that's something that you want to be very, very aware of. I added like barely 3 toothpick tips to this, to my 1 tablespoon, and I'm getting into the danger zone a little bit of adding maybe a little too much color. So you want to just really be careful of that.
Teaspoon.
Okay.
I kept saying tablespoon too. It's teaspoon.
I know, teaspoon. Oh my goodness, teaspoon, tiny bit. Okay, so now I'm going to actually add something to the white that I have here. I'm going to add some mica powder. So this is another way to add to your resin. Now the mica powder, you can pretty much add, I'm not going to say as much as you want, but because you only really need a little bit. But you can add, and that won't take on the resin. It won't become part of the mixture. It will stay on its own. So
what color do you want?
One of the whites there. I think there's like a bluey white.
Yeah, I like this one.
Yeah, this is very cool. Because this is actually true metallic blue. So if you can kind of see there, you can sort of see that it has a little bit of a blue sheen to it. So this is crystal clay sparkle dust. And this is the same as like a mica powder type situation here. All right, so now I'm gonna just open this up. And again, this is where those toothpicks are gonna come in handy. I know we kind of go through a lot of toothpicks, but everything needs to sort of be clean. So just a little dab. And I think I can get away with a little bit more. There we go. Okay, let's set that aside. All right, so now I have my mica powder in there, and that is going to just barely kind of take on. We want to make sure that it's nice and mixed in. One of the other things that you can use to color your resin, and this is actually turning a very pretty blue, which I like. One of the other things that you can use to color your resin is we talked a little bit about the artist concrete already today, but we have the concrete pigments, and those you can use, and they actually work really, really cool. And I'm going to show you, I did a little trio of examples to show you that right there. All right, get a little bit more of that in there. All right. And you know what? Let's have a little fun with this. Can you hand me the transparent blue dye? Whichever one is the transparent. Yep. Oh, there we go. All right. So because this has a little bit of blue to it, I'm gonna boost that up a little bit. So you're gonna get to see one of the transparent dyes as well. And again, I'm bringing over my empty little cup. All right. And I have a little transparent dye there. And I'm just going to kind of drop that into my cup there. I'm going to do one at a time. So I'm going to set that down. And just that one tiny little blue really makes it blue. But now it's all blue and shimmery. So kind of different. All right, there we go. All right, enough color mixing. I'm good. Will you close that up for me? All right, let me bring my bezel over here and let's actually put this into the bezel. And again, it's going to be that same kind of a style there. Now this one's a little bit bigger, so you can kind of get a little heavier with your drip, but just make sure that you're not getting it onto the sides there. So this is actually going to be a very pretty powdery, shimmery blue.
I feel like there are two kinds of resin people. There are the cautious, careful, tiny toothpick people, and then there's me, who's like, add more.
Add a little more. Yeah.
Keep going.
Resin is really fun. Don't let it intimidate you. I think, you know, that happened with me. Like when I first started working with resin, it's like, oh God, but what if I mess it up? So what?
Yeah.
You know? All right. And here's where like you'll notice that I'm trying to push it so that it gets in all those little corners, but just give it a second, let it find its way in there and it will sit nicely. All right, so before I kick it off to Alexandra, I want to talk about some bubble situation that I have happening here. All right, so you want a heat source. You can either use very hot breath if you got it, or you can use lighters. I like to use a little Bic lighter, but if you're worried about your hands getting a little too close or you need to be a little further away, one of these little like barbecue lighters is really good as well. All right, so now all you're gonna do is you're just gonna wave it across the top, so you just get your lighter happening.
And you are the master with the lighter. You even have a glove on and you're doing that.
Thank you. So you're just going to get those bubbles. So now you'll probably be able to, I'll let the camera come in as close as you can get here. And you see that I have bubbles on top there of my little blue piece. So here's what we're going to do. There we go. And those bubbles are just going to come to the surface. And I'm just barely catching them. And just kind of moving around. There we go. Now, the lighter is a process that you might do a couple of times. So once your resin starts to cure, so I'm kind of at a 0 hour right now, come back in like 20 minutes, check it again. Some bubbles might kind of naturally resurface, so you just want to be able to get those lighters within that first hour or two. So just come back and keep checking your piece. So we have a beautiful little blue piece, and that's some clear resin. Whew. All right, I'm exhausted.
If you have pesky bubbles, it's okay to stick your toothpick back in the resin that you poured, as long as you're not pushing the dome off of the corners. You can actually go in gently and poke those with your toothpick too.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about some more molds and everything in a second, but Alexandra, why don't you, because I know we have a lot of people very curious about the organic materials, so let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, what I basically did was I took my flower press from when I was 12 years old and that I had left sitting for so long, and I pulled it out and finally got to do something very special with it. So these were from trips I'd taken up north and that kind of thing, and I finally pulled out my special pieces and set them onto flat tags and into open bezels using the technique that we have a video on that Becky Nunn gave to us. And so to pre-treat these, what I did was I mixed up my resin, and you actually dip your organics into a little pool of resin and kind of coat them. And then once you have poured a bit of resin in, then you can add your organic, and that's what sort of slips it in without too many bubbles, keeps it from floating to the top, angling it in funny ways. It kind of just sticks better. So in this instance, you can see that I colorized the resin ahead of time the way Kat just showed you with some CASTIN craft. I did a first pour of purple on this flat tag, and then I overlaid it with the organics. I will say that because it had been poured over before, it didn't dome or adhere to the sides, it sort of slipped off. And that's where I'm saying that that's okay, because I was able to come after a day or so and just scrape the edges. I used my flush cutter to kind of clip off little bits, and it turned out. So it is possible.
Yeah, the thing you want to be careful with the organic materials is exactly what you just said, is the bubbles. So be careful about how you slip that in. And the other thing is, you were talking about dipping your piece in resin. Another alternative to that is to use the resin spray. So you can do a couple of coats of the resin spray on top of an organic material, and that will again kind of seal it and prepare it for the resin so that you won't have to deal with any sort of seepage onto the piece from the thicker epoxy resin. You have that resin spray that will kind of seal it as well.
Well, and here's a perfect instance where I should have done that.
Yes, well, that's okay. We show our mistakes.
Yeah, just a personal project, an experiment that I did with a found object. A black swallowtail butterfly that I found intact on the ground, and I'm a nature lover, I'm a collector, and just an honorer of all things nature. So I wanted to preserve that, and you can see when I put my hand back here that it sort of discolored and parts of it came off. Now this was just my first try, and I could have sprayed that wing like Kat is saying. I also could have poured just a little bit of resin in first and then added the wing and then added more resin after. So it's a learning experience. And
would you mind showing the back of that? Just,
yeah.
Again, it's part of the learning experience. Is that part of it popped out of the back because it did, like you see that there were some air bubbles that kind of tried to get underneath it. So that was another thing that can happen. So if it, unfortunately, if that does happen, there's not a whole lot of ways to fix it once it's in there in terms of the bubbles, but you can try to just sort of press it down again with like a toothpick or a clean popsicle stick to try to push out some of those bubbles as you're working. We do have a question.
Yeah, when using organic materials, does the resin preserve the color of the organic material, or does it fade over time?
Sure, so the question is about using resin with organic materials, and does it change the color of the organic material? I think the only thing that it really does is it might darken it slightly, but it does actually sort of preserve that color. Now, like I was talking about earlier, resin can, over time and over UV exposure, kind of yellow a little bit. So you do want to be, take good care of your resin pieces, but it won't color the organic itself. It might just turn a little bit amber. So that can happen.
That has to do more with the tint of the resin than it does with the piece that's trapped in it.
Yeah. Exactly. And another question?
Concerning yellowing,
Sure.
do you notice if certain brands yellow more over time?
I haven't noticed if certain brands yellow more over time. My go-to is either to use the Easy Cast or the ice resin. I think that it is a much clearer resin when you're working with, when you want it to be truly clear. Once you start adding color, you're really okay, because it'll keep that color. It might yellow, oh God, like I'm talking like years and years. Like I should have pulled out a piece that I did about 10 years ago, and it's just a little bit of like an ambery yellow.
And in certain instances,
yeah,
the tint lends itself to the style of the piece. So there are some sort of vintagey antique looks that it could actually look kind of sepia and neat.
Yeah.
And so Nunn Design in particular is the resin that I've used with the organics, and the ones that have the oxidized metals and those kinds of pieces.
Let me see. So, okay, so I do have a piece here. So if you want to, I'll try to kind of show you. So this is a piece that was done maybe 6 years ago, and it hasn't yellowed at all, but it's been, it's been taken out, it's been photographed, it's been in the sunlight, and I know it's hard to see because the back is black and it's really maybe only coming through for me here, but this is not yellowed. So this is maybe like I said, 6, maybe even 7 years old now at this point. But when things do yellow, so this is another example, and I know we're going to get to this in a second. So you can see, let's see here, this is white. So you can see that even the resin itself is a little bit of like it takes on the color that the organic material is. But if you look at the side, it is really clear. it just, I hope this is coming through on camera for you guys.
It's sort of prismatic.
Yeah, it's prismatic, but it can also, when it does yellow, it's so slight, but there's no real way to necessarily fully avoid that. Yeah, can we show your shells there?
Yeah.
Because this was cool, because this is another way to do an organic material where it actually is three-dimensional.
So I'm going to set this down so my plasticky gloved hand isn't under it. But these are shells, again, from my childhood. And as a collector, I have boxes of little special things I don't know what to do with. And this is a great application for a collector who wants to showcase a piece that you wouldn't otherwise want to just set out on a shelf, that kind of thing, keepsakes. And so the resin does not clearly dome over and cover all of the shells, but that's what's neat about it, is it gives it an aquatic feel and really lends itself to what I was trying to do there. So that was fun.
But as you did your first pour, you covered everything, but there were a couple shells that were sticking out of the resin.
Mm-hmm.
And how
the
did you fix
shells
that?
are old and they had lost their luster, and so I took and just actually with my toothpick just brushed a little bit of extra resin, let a little bit drip on those spots, and then dry over them, and that worked fine.
And you can actually paint resin on, so that's another kind of example there as well.
Can you wash the paintbrush after that, or is it?
I tend to use disposable paintbrushes when I'm working with resin, mostly because if I try to use it with a different dye, it'll be stiff, and sometimes you can actually have flakes of resin come off in your paint. So
Clear nail polish actually maybe would help with that too.
yeah, clear nail polish is another option there. I tend to not use nail polish when I'm working with jewelry, just because I never quite know exactly what's in it, how much acetone and if it's going to affect a metal. But it's entirely your choice. It does work. But it's just up to you.
Yeah. So can we go back to this little organic piece you had picked up before?
Let's talk about that while I pulled it out
So
there.
this is a piece in progress, and I'm going to make a ring out of it. So what I did was painted the inside of that bezel with some vintage patina, which we're going to talk about more. And I think the black really pops that flower nicely. So I'm going to glue that in, and what I'm going to use for adhesive is diamond glaze, because I don't want anything kind of gloppy that's going to dry weird. And this glaze is very, what would you call it, viscous, a little bit runny, and it works really well with the resin. So that is a work in progress. And should I go into the vintage, or?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do some of your pieces there.
Okay, well, I'm excited about this.
All right, so let me move these guys out of the way so we can get the camera in there nice and close.
Good. So I think I'm actually going to use this mold here, and this is an experiment. The vintage was kind of a happy accident where I was painting the backs of bezels and some charms, and we decided, can you just mix it into the resin? Well, let's give it a try. So that's what I did here, and you can see how the petal line turned out, and also the verdigris. And beyond that, I dipped a little bit into some closed jump rings. And you can see the ones on this side I domed, and the ones on this side are flatter. And so that was an experiment, and I'm looking forward to doing more with that. So what I'm going to do here is take some of our resin and put a little bit into each section of this mold, and then drip some color in and see how they turn out. And then I'm going to put them into various sizes of jump rings.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So you have your resin there. Do you need toothpicks, craft sticks? There you go.
Yep. So I'm going to get down, level with you. Give this a little bit of a stir. And actually pull in the colors I want to try. So I'm going to do some green. I want to do some yellow. I want to see how different this turquoise turns out, and also some purple. So I did shake these at the beginning so I wouldn't have to be too noisy. So I'm just going to take my craft stick and drizzle some resin into each of these sections. When I experimented with the other two colors, I was not scientific about it. I did about 5 drops of the petal line in there, and then for the verdigris, I'll be honest and say that the dried patina inside of the applicator caught, and then when I squeezed it, more came out than I had intended, so I really don't have a measurement on that. But I think the way these behave is they kind of come out the color that you see on the bottle, regardless of how much you add. So, and then in terms of how it sets, we had to wait and see on that too. It doesn't seem that adding any more of the patina changed the rate of time that it cured or anything like that.
Yeah, the only thing that you might end up with is if you found that you've added too much and your resin is a little sticky, you can use then the resin spray, and that will seal any of that away. So
Get a little quicker about this here.
no, you're good. Take your time. Resin takes
That's
time.
what you said. Yeah.
Don't
you
worry,
said
resin
take
takes
your
time. While you're doing that, because that's fun to watch, but let me show you guys a couple of the other colors, and I want to talk to you about the concrete pigment. It is something that I had pointed out, and I know we have a question about it, so I'm going to go ahead and handle that now. So here is what we did with the concrete pigment. Now, hopefully you're seeing this on the table here. But this is the difference. So this is a lot of that concrete pigment fully mixed into a piece of resin here. This is that concrete mix, and I added some of that copper mica powder. And this right here, this is kind of cool. It actually has a little speckled look because I wanted to make sure that the resin cured like this. And what happens is I didn't mix it fully because I wanted it to kind of look a little bit more like a rock. I thought that could be kind of cool. So this is the same amount of pigment, but not fully mixed. So that's the only difference between this one here and this one here. So this one is fully mixed and this one is not fully mixed. So you get all those little flecks in there. So kind of a cool little thing there. And when we're talking about adding color to resin, I want to point this out to you as well. The color of the metal does have an effect on the color of the resin. So let me draw this in here. This was the exact same resin pour, meaning it's the same color yellow. It is just dripped on a silverback, and it is dripped on a antiqued brass ox back. So that's what I mean, where it's like it's the exact same color, not another mix, not another day. So it just really does affect the way that comes into play. And you can also see that here I did a green one on the brass ox, and then here's that same green on silver. So it's similar, but it is different. So it does have a different little style to it.
That's a neat discovery. I really like seeing that.
One of the other cool things you can do with the color resin is you can actually get a little enameled look here. And I'm going to kind of set that there so you can see. What happens here is I did a little red and a little green, so I made little holly earrings. Now these bezels are the Gita bezels, and they're typically for Swarovski crystals. But I found out that you could add a little patina, or excuse me, a little resin in there as well. So I thought that was kind of neat. So there's a lot of things that you might not think of to use with resin, because it's not a bezel for resin, but try to experiment and have a little fun with that. So the last thing I want to show you before I answer that question is I have this here, and this is a piece. This is obviously already finished, but what I did here is I used some museum putty, and this is just the top of a little jewelry box, and this helps keep your resin level. So remember we were talking about using a couple of quarters? Well, with a leverback earring, how are you supposed to balance that? So I used a little bit of this museum putty, which is great. You can get this at a craft store. It's really fantastic. But this will help sort of level your piece there so you can pour it and get that nice flat top to the top of it so that it looks like a piece of enamel. All right, so Brian, we had a question?
Yeah, once resin cures, are you able to drill it?
Oh, hot.
Good.
Yes. All right. So here's what I did the other day. I made this little ring here. Now this is an open back bezel, and I'm going to talk to you about this in just a second. But this is an open back ring that I did, and I had that little hexagon there, and I wanted to do a little amber to make it look like a little honey. So I thought that was really cool. But what I did is I took some of that resin and I poured it onto some wax paper and just peeled that off. You can actually take hole punch pliers and punch a hole just right into the resin there. And now you have a hole for a pendant, or you can make connectors, all kinds of fun things. So yes, you can drill a hole. It just depends on how thick that resin is and how thick your pliers are. And we do have this tool, and I don't have it out here with me, I'm so sorry. We do have a tool where you can actually crank so you can see how far it's going to go down and that kind of thing as well. But you can absolutely drill resin. It's really, it's kind of a pliable material. It doesn't cure like a glass would, but go ahead and take a look at your resin about 24 hours into its initial cure and see if you want to punch it at that stage as opposed to letting it cure the full 72 hours till it's like fully ready to go. So that's another thing to kind of consider if you are going to drill or punch holes or anything like that into your resin. So when you do flat tags, one of the things that can happen is your resin can collapse into the hole. That's where those hole punch pliers are going to come in handy, because let it collapse, it's fine. Come back in with the hole punch pliers and repunch that hole and you'll be just fine. You'll be all set to go. All right, how we doing over there, Alexandra?
Good.
Ooh, you got some colors happening. It's like a painter's palette.
That's what I thought.
I love it.
So I've put a few drops into the different colors of metal in these closed jump rings. I have various gauges, and you'll see what I've done is I've got some utility tape, and it's upside down. So the sticky side's facing me. I will admit that a couple of times in this video my arm has caught and I've had to peel this off of myself. So I'm that kind of resin person. That's the same way that you would do a project like this with an open bezel. You take your frame, you press it down against tape, and then you pour your resin in. It's really that simple, but it looks so like artistic. It's just, it's like a real accomplishment. So I'm going to actually try to apply some resin into this small lotus, which we've never tried before. So
and yes, to get the tape, like to get the stickiness off the back, you can just use something like a Goo Gone, just to remove any of that.
So
I love that lotus. That's so cool.
Petal, I want to just try to get a little bit. Now already I've gone off on the edge a little. It's going to have to go into some crevices, so that's going to be a work in progress.
You can use some fresh toothpicks too.
Yeah.
Sometimes that helps, like once you've dripped in, to use a fresh toothpick to kind of push it around.
And actually drag it just a little bit into the crevices. I've really chosen a special project to do with you here. All right, so last little section. Matches my glove. So there's really just no end to the possibilities with what you can do. And my thought with the jump rings was, once they're dry, to set them into a larger open piece like that butterfly's in. Yeah, so I have secret plans for that.
And while you're doing that, Camera, you can stay right there. I'm just going to remind people that we have the giveaway. I know we've been getting lots of questions. I can hear Brian typing away furiously. But we've been getting lots of questions, which is wonderful, but we do still have that giveaway happening. So if you guys are just joining us right now, be sure to get your comments in for that. And we're going to still do a little bit more of the resin work here. But we're here to answer questions, because we know that resin is really just an intimidating process. And it's like, oh, can I use this? Can I use this? You know, and one of the things that I love, especially here at Beadaholique, is that we have the opportunity to test some things out for you. So if you're curious about something, you know, send us a message on Facebook or Instagram or however you connect with us on YouTube, you know, with customer service, and let us know, because we're happy to test stuff out, because that's how we learn as well. You know, sometimes we'll get questions like, oh, you know, I didn't think about that, but that might be a really interesting technique or a neat idea. So
you're really good at following up too on the Bead Table Wednesdays. You come back to people, so that's really nice.
Yes. If questions come in, you know, over the weekend and even in the coming weeks, I'll try to address those in our Bead Table Wednesdays that we have every week on Facebook Live, so you can connect with us there as well. So we'll kind of talk about some new things that we've been able to test out.
Yeah, and speaking of testing, trying different colors, these little jump ring experiments are a great way for you at home to try things if you don't want to wreck, you know, a bezel, because those cost money and they're special. And so that's part of the pressure with resin that can be alleviated when you figure out ways of trying things out until you're comfortable, and just to keep doing it too, and to spill. You got to spill a little bit to get comfortable, has been my experience.
No, but I love that deep turquoise that you're working with there. That's really beautiful, because then you can put them all in a piece and do like polka dots, or make it its own little thing. And these are closed jump rings.
Yeah.
And you did hammer these a little bit, right? To get a nice
right.
little
that
flat.
That was a great idea. Just in case there was a lift in any of these, Kat said, why don't you just give it a little tap with a hammer? So I tapped 5 times on each side. And I think that will work well. And there's no seepage happening like there were with my first couple of experiments with this.
Can you do the yellow? I'm curious to see how the yellow looks. Yellow's always a difficult color, but I think you could do something really cool where this is like the center of a flower design.
Lots of ideas, yeah.
So that could be cool.
Yeah, a whole rainbow of possibilities. Now I am noticing the resin getting a little bit more viscous, and my gloves are catching a little on the toothpick too. So sometimes I will be without gloves when I'm doing this portion of it.
We've been working for, I'd say, 45 minutes or so. Brian,
explain it.
About 45 minutes or so. What time is it? Okay, so about an hour. So yeah. I know this class is running a little long, guys. Stick with us. We've been answering as many questions as possible. I do want to talk about the silicone putty mold here. So I'm going to let you finish up that one there.
Go to it.
And then get to that. All right, so let me take you guys over here. So this is a cool product. And this is something that I've really enjoyed working with. So basically, this is another 2-part system. So this is the Easy Mold silicone putty. Now what happens here is that you take the same amount. It works very similar to like a crystal clay. So you take part A and part B, and you put them together and you kind of mix them until there's no more striations. And then what you do is you can form it around a piece. So again, here's an organic material. Now I didn't want this to be part of my finished piece, but what I wanted to do is kind of recreate this. So I created a mold around it, and I actually formed it up and over because I wanted that little lip there. But you can just see, and I'm going to kind of pop this out. This is a mold that I made, and I can use this over and over and over. So you can see it has all those little bumps on it, and bumps and ridges. So you can just do it like that. And then what I did is I pressed it down a little bit on the table when my mold was forming to give me that flat little edge so it'll stay nice and level for me. And then I mixed some blue resin and some mica powder in there and poured it in and let it cure. And then about 48 hours later, I popped it out. And you can see that I've been sanding a little bit. This is kind of unfinished thus far, but I've been sanding it a little bit on this side so it's a little more dull. But on the top, I did a little bit of that resin spray, so you can see just how shiny that is. So I'm going to turn this into something, I don't know, maybe like a cool ring, or it can be just kind of a fun little cabochon. You can do some really cool things with that. So the other thing that I want to address before we close out here is glitter. So these are the glitter rocks pieces here. Now in this piece here, and again, I really hope this is coming through on camera, you can see that a lot of that glitter has sunk to the bottom. And what happened there was I actually mixed it into the resin, and I didn't love the way that that looked because it was all sunken. But what happened was then I added glitter on top, and it just sat on top there. So there's 2 different ways to do that. There's also a third way to do that. And the third way is to use crystal clay. So I mixed my crystal clay and put a really thin layer of black into the bottom of this bezel. And then I sort of used the glitter rocks as though they were chatons, as though they were Swarovski crystal chatons, and I picked them up one at a time and placed them into that bezel and really put them into that crystal clay and embedded them so they stayed at that same level. And then I added clear resin on top, and that is the result there. So that's kind of another cool little look. So one of the other things that I wanted to talk to you guys about is the French enamel. So this is what that looks like. It is just a nice white, clear. It has that flat, kind of almost underfilled look. And that is like the French enamel look. So you can get this as well. And this is just using that CASTIN Craft to Opaque pigment. Let me see.
Well, I have just finished up here. And there's one quick thing I wanted to show you.
Sure. Let's bring it back over to you.
Uncharacteristic of me, I managed not to drip anything.
Hey.
So here, the resin was spilling out of its sections, and what I realized was I can enamel this side, and I'm very curious to see when I take the tape off how it seeps into those holes and fills. And I think that on the other side, I'm going to have my petals. So that's
yeah, I think you'll have that enamel look again. Yeah, but I love that you were able to get some domes on some of those little jump rings there. So guys, keep your questions coming. I know we threw a lot at you today. A lot kind of happened with resin, and it does take a little bit of time to work with. You know, we didn't really get into a lot of the flat tags there, but that's definitely something to experiment with. Now, we do have videos to show you all of the things that we talked about here today, adding color, adding mica powder, adding, you know, glitter, all these different things, working with the flat tags, working with organic materials. We've been very fortunate enough to have Nunn come into our design space here and shoot some amazing resin videos for you. There's a lot you can do with shadows, like with the shadow box style with that open back bezel, and she's fantastic at that. So please head over to beadaholique.com, watch those videos. And yeah, so thank you so much for joining us, guys. We're just about ready here to announce our giveaway winner.
I know, I just don't want to stop. I was reaching over the flat tags. I really just want to use the resin that I have and
some resin here, so probably after we're done with our live feed, we're going to do some more projects with our resin because we still have some extras to use. All right, so Brian, do we have a giveaway winner for today? All right, congratulations to Jean Sanders. So congratulations, Jean. All you need to do is send our service team a email. So that's service@beadaholique.com. So congratulations to Jean Sanders. So you are the winner of our fabulous giveaway, and we hope it inspires you to create all kinds of fun resin projects and to share them with us. So I know we covered a lot, guys, but thank you so much for sticking with us. I know this was a little bit of a longer class, but we are going to be doing more resin in the future. So if you guys have any suggestions or something you'd like to see, a color combination or anything like that, be sure to hit us up here at beadaholique.com.
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much for joining us, guys, and we'll see you back here very soon. Bye.